All righty. Welcome back. I am your host, Sloan Reale. Find your voice, rock your confidence. We are here today, episode 26, part two of two, with my very extra special guest, Stacy. So, first of all, before we jump in, I just want to thank you so much, you, the listener. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to even tune in on this. I know that people's time, our resources, time is the one resource that we can never get back. So if you're listening to this, we are both so incredibly grateful to you for being here today. As I mentioned, this is episode two. This is the second part of part one because we had so much fun in the first part, which was human design and how to use it to propel your voice forward. Human design, you're going to hear more from Stacy, is an expert in that field. But before we jump in, just a couple of quick things here. We have our quote of the day: strive not to be a success, but rather to be of value. Because when we are of value, we're automatically a success. So, with that, tons of value coming at you today. I have in the studio my sister, who is a Harvard Business School, Stanford University graduate. She has been a principal at SY Partners, where she specialized in helping CEOs and their teams discover and articulate hard to tell high stakes stories for their audiences. Stacy was also the CEO of Pogo Pet, a pet wellness and community site that was recognized by Forbes Best of the Web for 4 consecutive seasons. She is today a soul aligned life coach working with enlightened leaders and leadership teams. She uses the tools of human design, the gene keys, and the work of Byron Katie to help people create and live their authentic, soul aligned life and leadership code. She shares her observations and insights about these topics on her own weekly podcast, To Be Authentic with Stacy Estrella. And you can learn more about her services and offers at To Be Authentic. So, with that, if you missed the first episode with my sister here about human design, please go back and listen to episode 24 in Find Your Voice, Rock Your Confidence. We talked a lot about some of the things we're going to be covering today, but went into more detail and specifics about growing up and learning about our designs. And our podcast is fabulous. It is filled with tons of practical, useful information you can use right away. And she is an expert in that area. So today, I just want to address the potential and the possibilities of podcasts before we jump in. And one is podcast is a huge growing industry right now. There's so many different things you can do with podcasting. You can use a podcast to promote your own business, to promote you and your business as a guest on other people's podcasts. You establish yourself and position yourself as an expert and can land speaking gigs if that's something you want to do. Podcasts are a great way to share your passions and inspire others. You can use your podcast to help others, tapping into multiple streams of income. You can market yourself as a leader in your own industry. Another big feature is that it's really fun. I have actually been enjoying this platform more than I realize. It's a little bit of work to pull it all together. I don't do any back end stuff. I have a whole team that does that for me, but I still have to do all of the pre edit. So there's work involved there. But I have to tell you, it is so satisfying each week when the episode is released and to hear how it's been edited and put together in a way that just flows. And I literally enjoy listening to myself. I make myself laugh. It's also a great way to build community. The possibilities to podcasting are really endless. So, did you know right now, it's probably even higher since I got these numbers. There's an estimated 800,000, it has to be more than that. There has to be over 1 million active podcasts in over 100 different languages. Podcasting is one of the fastest growing information and entertainment platforms in the world. With over 60 million people listening to podcasts each week, no matter where your passion lies or what you're an expert in, chances are there's an audience out there that is hungry for your podcast. Just a couple of things. Your potential audience is huge. Here's some numbers for you. With over 51%, it has to be more, it has to be higher. With over 51% of the US population having listened to a podcast, when you consider the amount of global listeners, your potential audience increases to hundreds of millions of people. And I will end with this on the stats. Major brands like Spotify are claiming that podcast will be as important to the company as streaming is for Netflix. So if you are tuned in and you are potentially thinking of starting your own podcast, or you really would like to do a podcast, but you're not sure you have anything valuable to share, my biggest thing is you won't know unless you try it, right? We learn through trial and error. According to my human design, I really learned by trial and error, making lots of errors. So with that, if you are new to this podcast, if you're still getting to know who I am and what I'm about, I am a women's vocal empowerment coach. I actually began teaching voice over 2 decades ago, about 23 years ago. It came out of, at that time, it was just about teaching people how to sing. And then over time, I started seeing all kinds of other interesting things with people's voices and issues and vocal cord challenges. But one of the greatest challenges that I run into all the time is people just not either not knowing how to use their voice properly, or B, primarily the biggest issue being using their voice confidently, and all of the judgment that we have around our voice. I want to, without any further ado, I did this out of order, but we've landed here. We're back here. Please welcome Stacy Estrella, a human design expert. And we're both relatively new to the podcasting platform. I'm only a couple of steps ahead of her, not very far along at all. But as she came in, she started to have some challenges right away. And so this podcast is not so much about what's going on with your voice and the physical aspects. It really has to do more with the psychology and our thinking process around our voice. So, Stacy, when you started, first of all, welcome back. It's been a little bit trying to get back to this next episode, and you talk about things that come up unexpectedly. And when you're working with any type of technology and internet and any issues, there's so many issues outside of our control. So coming back to, there's always going to be challenges with whatever we do. And in the area of podcasting, I just want to encourage you, the listener, okay, I am not a technical person at all. And I have to be careful what I put out there in the universe and with my energy to say that I'm anti, I don't like it, I don't want to do it, because it will come back and I'll be hit with some new challenge I have to deal with. But I want to just tell you, if you are one of those that feel you're not very technically inclined, for where I am today and what I've been able, the hurdles I have jumped over with incredible amounts of patience, both with the tech and with myself. The learning curve has been huge. And what I'm doing today with podcast and tech stuff is truly remarkable. I'm surprising my own self. I'm very pleased with the growth that I've had. So don't let that be a reason that you just poo it and say, I'm never going to do a podcast because I don't want to deal with any of that crap. Because you have some really valuable things to share with the world. So with that, Stacy, you have some very valuable things to share with the world. And I want to go back to when your first experience. There were a whole bunch of things that you got all the gear in order and you got your talk all together. And then when you started out, can you share with the audience what your experience was like when you got started?
If it's okay, I want to start a step before about even making a decision to have a podcast.
Yes, please.
Okay. Because when I started, I actually didn't think there was a place for a podcast in my business and in the work that I'm doing. And the only reason why I started to consider it is because of the business coaching that I'm currently in with you, with a human design business coach. And I learned that a significant part of my profile really called for me to use my voice, quite literally. and not just use it, but to fall in love with it. And so that was really shocking for me because it actually has to do with my money. My money and wealth creation is using my voice. But my career and work as a storyteller is actually to lift and support the voices of others. And so this came as a really real shock for me. And so I started to listen to other podcasts around the human design and the gene keys, which is my expertise, my specialty. And I just saw the patterns. And to me, it's like, who needs another podcast on human design? There are plenty of good podcasts out there on human design. And so I'm a really big believer that a person should not speak just to be heard. They should speak because they have something to say, right? Something important to say. And what I realized was what people don't need is another human design podcast on the gates and the channels. All of those are great. There are plenty of people out there teaching the basics of human design. What's missing is here's what it's like to live your design every single day. And so to me, that was the opportunity to basically take human design and make it practical, accessible, and pragmatic. I'm trying to think of the right word, but basically make it actionable in people's lives, but through the lens of what my experience is living my own design.
Love that, right? Applicable.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So that encouraged you to take the next step and actually put together your own podcast. And of
Well,
course, there's all the logistical pieces of that, right? So this is a podcast for new podcasters, or if you're considering becoming a podcaster. And it goes without saying, there's always, you got the tech set up, you've got all the back end, you've got your content you need to pull together, you've got all your intros, your outros, all that you got to go get on all the platforms. So this podcast is not about that, friends. This is about the psychology. This is about you really stepping into and owning your truth, your voice, your message, and then sharing that on this platform, an amazing, powerful platform. You heard the statistics earlier, in a way that you get to just show up and shine without apology, without worrying about what other people think. So you got it all set up, and then you went through some interesting things early on, your first couple episodes or so. So tell us about your journey, right? You got it all set up, you got the gear, you got the mic, you got the content, and you go to push record. And what happened for you?
we're skipping over the part where it was pre-podcast, but I was starting to interview people because I was all about interviewing and again, showcasing other people's stories. If you remember, you were the first interview, you were my test interview, where again, I wanted to feature clips of people living their human design. But in the process of doing that, when I would do the editing, so again, it wasn't a podcast, it was just an audio way of connecting with my audience. And
Oh, okay. This wasn't the podcast yet.
it wasn't the podcast yet, but do you remember?
That was part of the podcast. Oh, so thank you for clarifying for everybody here. So this is pre-podcast. So this
Yeah.
was now, was this a way for you to avoid, were you avoiding having to do an actual podcast with the pre-podcast exercises, or was your intention to move in that direction?
No, the podcast wasn't actually in my mind then. All I knew was what I wanted to do with human design was share actual stories of people living their design. And the first effort at that was to interview a handful of people who I had either done a reading for or had been coaching and guiding in their design, to just do a brief interview and create 2-minute clips that I could put on a website. And this was the version before To Be Authentic. So I was in a transitionary state or early development state. And if you remember when I was recording, and so there wasn't a conscious, I'm resisting a podcast, because at that point I hadn't even considered it yet. But what this experience did is it exposed that I was very uncomfortable putting my voice out there. And I didn't realize how uncomfortable I was until I did the interview with you and you gave me really candid feedback. And when I interviewed you, I had all of these things set up where I would have you repeat the question back, because I had planned to edit myself out the whole time. I didn't want to include the conversational piece. And I remember it being really complicated and tricky watching your body language. And it was a really bad experience for you on the other side, right? Do you remember?
Yeah, so you just hit on two things. One was that, and I wasn't clear what you were trying to do at that point, I don't think. And yes, it was more of a Q&A, and then at the end of the day, and so it felt very, I don't know if contrived is the right word, but it didn't feel like a conversation. This is a conversation, right? This is real, this is genuine. We're just here hanging out. If we were in the same room, we'd have our coffee or our tea here with us, burning our candle and all of that. And I wasn't having that experience. It was the first time I had ever had that type of an experience. And I think that you ended up throwing that strategy or that way of doing it. You got rid of that and you took the next step. But before we jump into that, I want to go back to, do you remember the feedback that was helpful that I had given you prior to that? Right? Dealing with the camera, this is an issue for a lot of, if you're doing video, people are always funny about the camera thing. I have clients right now that that's their next thing with their courses, is they have to videotape all of their courses. And what they're running into, as soon as the tape starts to roll, or the whatever they're filming on, they just completely freeze up. The brain is just like, they know exactly what they're going to say, and as soon as it starts going, they completely forgot what they said. And I used to do that before all my video training. So it's just one of those things with flight hours. Also, who you're speaking to, how you're just keeping it in a conversation form, knowing when you are recording for a podcast, is it just audio that you're going to be recording, or are you also going to be repurposing some of that content over on video? So that's where things like, if you're doing visual stuff, that was one of the things that you had run into. You were wanting to do visuals and share your screen and stuff. If it's just podcast, it's just audio, there's no way that your listener is going to be able to see what it is that you are referring to if it's just audio format.
Yeah,
There
I
might
think
be some other things too. I can't remember.
No, I think now we're in full podcast mode, because the thing that I just described was pre-podcast. And so I hadn't even come up against any of these issues. And it was when I realized that, oh, I have to bring my voice into the equation, and not just as scaffolding or support. It has to be the lead, and with my point of view. And all of that was really daunting, because it forced me to have to, again, think through my positioning, think through all that, think about how it would relate back to my business. And I did go through wanting to do more sophisticated sharing. So to your point about the screen shares, I wanted to do mini readings on the fly. And I remember your feedback was, I just couldn't follow. And it was very loving and supportive, but I just couldn't follow, because I'm listening and I couldn't follow. And I think what has been so supportive, and why I thought, I think I have encouraged you to do a podcast for podcasters offer, because to have somebody in your corner who's really there with love and warmth and support, and really wants you to succeed in your uniqueness, I feel like that's what you did for me. And it was really just one, it's such a funny thing, but it goes back to the mind and energy. And when I hear your voice, and when I hear how you open a podcast, that's such a masterclass just in and of itself, that I feel how connected you are, and just how comfortable you are in your message and in your skin and with the camera. And I have a lot of, or I'm working through a lot of discomfort from being so exposed to the world, because I love being hidden. You're a stage performer. I live in a cocoon, and we're just, and also to be fair, we're built differently. And this does go to human design, right? You have a defined ego. That means that you are in this world with confidence. You were born with it. You were born to present yourself and put yourself out there. I wasn't, right? I'm not here to prove myself, yet there's pressure to prove myself. And so there's constantly this mental baggage and emotional baggage with that. So working with you hasn't been trying to make myself show up like you. And that was another thing with the camera, because I know you have given me feedback and I haven't accepted it all, because we have different ends we have different goals and ends, right?
Yes.
You know, I do not put these on YouTube anymore, but I do make.
I did not know that.
I don't, because it's too much of a headache for me on the back end. And I don't want to spend energy that way, because again, in human design terms, for anyone who does know human design, I'm sacral authority. My sacral tells me whether or not I have energy for something. I do not have energy to go the step of YouTube, right? It's enough just to do the audio, the Instagram clips, but I don't go that next step to YouTube. And that's just where I am right now. It might change in the future, but I am much more conscientious about looking at the camera now than I was. Even if I'm not on YouTube, I still recognize and respond to that counsel that you gave, because I tend to look all over the place, because that's how my brain operates as I'm searching for an answer or the right way to say something. I'm still building this muscle of looking at the camera when I'm explaining something. And I can see the difference between me 10 episodes ago and the episode I just did last week. But your support has been, vocal quality, right? So even when you listen to my podcast, I think there was a time where you said you really are owning your content, your material. You could tell when I crossed over a hurdle. You're also first to tell me this is too complicated and too much, and I, as the audience, am saturated and I can't break it up into a couple of episodes. I won't, because that's, again, I have my way of doing my podcast and the way I want to package content. I recognize not everyone's going to want certain details, but I still welcome your perspective. And I'm sharing this because if someone comes to you for advice on their podcast, it's not like everyone just has to do what you say, but you're going to offer a perspective from an audience, and as a vocal coach who looks at and coaches performers, because a podcast is a performance, right? There's no way around it. It's a performance. It's a connection with an audience. And that's what you're so good at, is helping people align their energy with the energy of the audience. And that's been super valuable to me.
Oh man, you just covered so many brilliant points right there. And again, if you are a new podcaster, if you are considering starting a podcast, that was just so beautifully said. So many different things that you just covered there, Stace. One of them being, I love, you've decided that you're not using YouTube right now. So you, listener, audience, friends, community here, you get to create this the way you want it. This is your thing. This is your show. This is an extension of you and your personality out in the world. We don't need cookie cutter. We don't need you to be like anybody else. We want you to be you. So just because Susie Schmozy down the street is doing it one way, or somebody else in your company, a lot of real estate agents are starting to do there's just every industry is starting to use this strategy, this way of marketing and promoting themselves. And if it doesn't work for you, don't do it. You don't need that added piece. And I love too, you just said knowing your audience is huge. First of all, you're knowing not just your audience and who you're speaking to, who this is for, what is the purpose of your podcast? For what purpose are you doing anything, right? What is your intention with sharing this information with the world, right? My intention, the whole reason this was even born, is because last year, post-pandemic, it was one of my biggest years. I don't know if it was the biggest year, but I served more people last year, over 100 people. And it was physically draining. It was emotionally, I'm thinking, this is not sustainable. I can't keep up like this. I'm exhausted. I don't, what is my, how can I do this? How can I get this information out there? That's how I landed at podcasts. Is, you know what? This is an excellent platform. I love working on it. I have guests lined up through the end of the year and into 2024 already. I'm so excited. And it just works. This works for me. Each podcast, is for a different purpose. We're addressing different issues. Oh, it all comes back to the voice, vocal empowerment, how to up our game using our voice. Can you speak to that a little bit, Stace? I do have what they call in human design an open throat with no activations at all, which is apparently why I'm so good at what I do and when I serve my clients. Coming back to how I'm using the podcast, it comes back to my design. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think there are two parts of your chart that are particularly interesting for your work as a vocal coach. The first is that you have an open throat and no activations, which is just uncanny given that you're a vocal mentor. But also when you think about it, it doesn't surprise me because because you have zero activations on your throat, there's no predisposed way that you are expecting someone to use their voice, right? So anyone that comes in to your aura, that comes in to work with you, basically has the most receptive mentor to work with them on any issue, whether it's psychological, whether it's physical, whatever it is. And this is why a lot of times I refer to, because I've also followed your career for the last 25 years, whatever, as a vocal coach, so many of the results to me, when I look at them, the themes, they've been about healing. And that empowerment that you're talking about, that you're offering people through their voice, it always seems to be about some sort of deep healing. And the only other piece I'll talk about with your chart is you also have the channel of initiation, which has this maverick quality to it. And it's about this love of being somewhere, being first, right? It's very competitive. It wants to be first. It's why when you first learn the basics for your method for vocal coaching, like you became expert, like you pushed yourself, you became the go-to person in Santa Barbara really fast. And this quality is not just about initiating yourself, being the first, it's about initiating others. So you are initiating your clients into this higher level of ownership of their voice, this higher level of empowerment. And I just think the two of those qualities together are just really, really powerful. And I think it's what makes you so effective and clear in your mission to empower women through the use of their voice. I think it's a good moment for all this to come through consciously.
Absolutely, absolutely. And with the little bit that I know about human design, that has been the game changer for me. And we've spoke on the previous episode, and you've got some episodes coming up in the area of healing what has happened in our own family, in our birth family, in my relationship with my husband, with my children, literally just within the last year it's been remarkable. I'm operating so differently, mainly because I'm not second guessing myself anymore. I'm looking at how I'm wired, how I make decisions. I'm not asking everybody else for their approval or thoughts or permission. It's just like, no, what do you want to do next with this, Sloan? So that's been really beautiful. So speaking of next steps, so you have your podcast is going. Can you tell the listeners a little bit? Can you share with the audience where they can find you, where they can find more information on you, if they want to set an appointment? Give them the lowdown. How can they get a hold of you? What can they do?
I love that. So the first place is the podcast, which is To Be Authentic with Stacey Estrella. And then my website is tobeauthentic.co. So that's CO. And That's where you can find information about our readings that we offer right now. We have a superpowers and kryptonite reading, which basically helps you navigate shadow and gift and gives you what traditional readers do is there are 3 readings. This is giving you the essence, the essential components that could be in 3 different readings into 1 reading, so that you get stuff that you need now to operate and know where you're really strong, know where you're vulnerable to other people's conditioning and or messaging. And then we also have coaching, our quantum to quantum team coaching, but really it's the website and it's the podcast.
Beautiful, beautiful. And you've got some little freebie things up there too. I love the little chart that I downloaded. I pull that out every day before I do my quiet time. I just go through my little checkbox. Okay, am I checking in? Am I getting quiet? Does this apply?
The quantum way, yeah, that's one of our freebies. Yeah, so
Love the quantum way. Love the quantum way. So this is beautiful, and this is just such a pinpoint of information and what this conversation opens up to. But again, if you are new to this podcast, if you're new to human design, if you are just really curious about vocal work, like you're not sure, you think that you'd like to start your own podcast, but you have no idea where to begin with the voice, you can head over, and all of this information will be in the show notes and links that you can just click and go. But I have a session. It's an initial 1-hour evaluation from curious to confident. It's fun. It's informative. You take away a individually created audio file for you to start exercising your voice, your mind, your body, anything that you thought you believed about your voice. We undo all of that in that first session. I show you actually what is possible. If you're concerned, don't let that limited thinking move in there, right? We are all amazing, brilliant beings with amazing, brilliant information to share with the world. That's what we need more of. We need more breathing, more love, more tenderness, more kindness. And we all need to continue to inhale that confidence and exhale doubt. So thank you so much for tuning in today, friends. Until next time, we will see you. And please, if you found any value in this, please go give this podcast a thumbs up, subscribe on YouTube, subscribe to the podcast, and share this with other people that you might care about.